OTA update this week cracked the nerf bat at several cards that were key pieces of top decks. After the first day or so of data is in, how are those recently nerf cards performing? Honestly, a lot better than I thought they were going to be. Both Lockjaw and Forge were cards with their new stat lines that are expecting to still be reasonable and competitive, but Darkhawk at 5/4 was a card that I honestly thought was going to struggle a lot more than it is so far. Well, it's worth noting that the play rate on Darkhawk is much lower than the other two, and we're looking at smaller sample sizes to start with this early format glance. It's promising that it looks like Second Dinner has successfully taken these top contenders and brought their power level in line, giving more things room to breathe while still leaving them competitively viable options for people that enjoy them. Let's go ahead and dive on into deck lists that will not only contain these three cards, but also a whole bunch of other stuff that's looking sweet in this developing metagame. We kick off my Jeff's picks this week with an updated take on one of my favorite brews, She-Hulk Control. This deck list essentially looks to get proactive disruption on the board, i.e. Goose, Cosmo, and Storm, to kind of control not only where the opponent can play, but what is optimal for them to play where, in tandem with cards that have really efficient energy costs and reasonable stat lines. Sunspot plus She-Hulk has always been the premier way to put numbers into play for this deck, but our latest release in Proxima Midnight introduces a new 3-card package that gives us stats at an incredibly efficient rate. When you're using Blade to discard Proxima, you're effectively getting 10 stats for 1 energy, and when we're using Lady Sif to discard Proxima, we're getting 12 points worth of stats for just 3 energy. The way this deck is constructed, unless we have a She-Hulk in hand, Lady Sif is always going to bin Proxima for us, and even when we do have She-Hulk, if we've soaked enough energy on the previous turn, Sif can still target Proxima. Typical play line with this deck is you'll pass on turn 5, so that way on turn 6 you can play She-Hulk for 10 points of power, Lady Sif for 12 with Proxima, and then follow up with either Jeff the Baby Landshark into your Flooded or Lizard somewhere else on the board for another 3 to 5 points. It puts a lot of stats out in a way that's difficult for your opponent to predict while being simultaneously disruptive with all of its proactive threats. My second Jeff's pick this week is responsible for my latest Infinity Border edition from Infinite Conquest. It's playing a ton of my favorite Marvel Snap cards, and that is the Kitty Collector deck. This deck uses its namesake Kitty Pryde in tandem with 3 different 2-energy cards, Angela, Collector, and Elsa Bloodstone, to continually put stats on the board and grow them up and up and up in a way that's difficult for our opponent to deal with. In addition to Kitty Pryde having synergy with all of these things, Jeff the Baby Landshark is fantastic with Angela as well as Elsa, and then we have utility slash disruption thanks to Snowguard and Shang-Chi. This deck also is looking to leverage Quinjet along with cards that generate us additional cards at random, such as Agent Coulson and Maria Hill, who are phenomenal cards, especially inside of Conquest, because it makes it difficult for your opponent to predict your output range. You'll note that there's also a card here that this deck is often named after Loki in the very last slot, but I call this deck Kitty Collector because at its core, it's not a Loki deck. In fact, compared to a lot of other decks playing Loki, I think one of the worst things you can do with this deck is slam Loki on turn 4. If you're going to be playing this deck well, the thing you want to be doing is focusing on growing your small threats, with Loki being kind of a break glass in case of bad matchup, i.e. Annihilus decks or Destroy decks. Loki is excellent into grabbing their own threats, or if your own hand is bad, Loki can give you a reset, but in general, when this deck is winning games, it's doing it on the back of its scaling 2 energy cards, not based on stealing your opponent's deck. Kicking off our high potential category this week, we have Shuri Phoenix Force putting up impressive stats on the post-infinite ladder after this most recent over-the-air update. This deck has a 2-pronged plan of attack that has some key overlapping pieces. Sometimes you blow up Human Torch or Multi-Man, and then you bring it back with Phoenix Force to slide your movement cards all around the board to blow up stats. Other times, you'll Shuri into Nimrod, and then use your Destroy pieces to blow a 12-power Nimrod all around the board, winning that way. Arnim Zola has overlapping synergy with both halves of these deck as well. If it hits a Nimrod, it creates 2 12-power Nimrods each of your other locations, or if you reanimate a Human Torch with Phoenix Force, then end it in an empty lane, you can use Arnim Zola to double up that Human Torch, winning 2 other lanes with it. This is definitely a deck list that I'm personally going to be keeping an eye on as the sample size increases, see if its stats stay strong. That being said, I'm not super surprised to see specifically a Shuri Nimrod deck doing well, as I recently called out in my Series 4-5 tier list that I thought 12 power Nimrod was well positioned into all the Shang-Chi that's been present in Marvel Snap lately. Our next high potential deck list this week is a Black Knight Zabu amalgamation that has a plethora of ways to put powerful stats into play. We have a small discard package with Black Knight and Ghost Rider, allowing us to cheat 20 points of power into play thanks to the Infinite being discarded by either Blade or Lady Sif. We have the 3-card Sentry package in tandem with the Hood as well as a Nihilist that can put negative stats on our opponent's side of the board while also generating us 4 10s and 1 6s. And finally, because this deck is playing a variety of reasonable 1 energy cards, Cull Obsidian is a 3/10 when Zabu is in play, as well as Shang-Chi, who can chop down our opponent's big stats when our own numbers are not enough to overwhelm them. Our next high potential deck list this week is an excellent choice if you're an Artgerm Dazzler enjoyer. Bass Patriot is a deck list that's been quietly plugging along, putting up impressive stats for the last couple of months now, but never gaining any real traction in terms of popularity. I think this deck list does a phenomenal job of attacking on a few different axes. First off, it's very good at going wide and playing for all 3 paths thanks to the bodies that Squirrel Girl and Mysterio provide in tandem with Patriot and Blue Marvel pumping everything up on our board. This deck can also chop down opposing large lanes thanks to Valkyrie setting everything to 3 and then allowing us to win that symmetrical argument thanks to our ongoing buffs or a demon from the Hood plopping down as the last card in the lane. Finally, this deck list is able to go tall in single lanes even without Valkyrie, thanks to Dazzler often being a 2/9 when used in tandem with Bast, or Iron Man simply doubling up our stats that can often be quite large thanks to all of our variety of ongoing bonuses. Our final deck list in the high potential category this week is a new Lockjaw-less version of Thanos that is Spectrum Zoo. This deck list plays a variety of ongoing threats that the deck's namesake and Spectrum can all pump up on the final turn of the game, with it being important to remember that 2 of Thanos' Infinity Stones, the Power Stone and the Soul Stone, are both 1 energy ongoing effects as well. This deck list plays other ways to pump up all of its 1 energy cards, such as Khazar and the Blue Marvel, and then it's also playing Valkyrie, similar to the Patriot deck that we looked at before, to chop down opposing threats to size, while also breaking the symmetry in that Valk path in our favor thanks to all of the deck's ongoing bonuses. While our 3 top performing archetypes this week are all going to be familiar faces, it is worth pointing out that after the OTA, while all these decks are still putting up strong numbers, their metrics are weaker than what they were before some of their key cards were tapped down, meaning this OTA has done some good, allowing some of the decks that we looked at before here potential room to break into this category in future weeks. We kick things off with just stock Thanos Lockjaw, blobs, scars, and others that we are used to seeing. The one important piece of technology to point out here is that the best performing Thanos Lockjaw decks after the OTA all contain our latest season pass card in Black Swan now, in large part I would wager because she helps alleviate that extra cost on Lockjaw by allowing you to go Black Swan on 3 and then play Lockjaw plus utilize him on 4, still giving you 3 Lockjaw spins over the course of a game. Our next top performing deck list honestly surprised me with its metrics, but with hundreds of matches logged, this stock Zabu Darkhawk deck is still a top contender in the format, even with Darkhawk being a 5/4. I do think it's noteworthy that this particular list that has the best metrics is leveraging Sentry as well as Annihilus. I think this Sentry Annihilus package is key to leveraging 5 energy Darkhawk, in part because the demon that the Hood provides allows us to play 1 5 energy thing, i.e. Hawk or Annihilus on turn 5, and then a second 5 energy thing along with the demon on turn 6, spending all of our energy very efficiently. That being said, this deck does have to make some real choices now on that final turn of the game, because you're no longer going to be able to play Darkhawk and Annihilus in tandem with something like Shang-Chi on the final turn of the game to disrupt your opponent. Essentially, you're going to be faced with a choice in a lot of your games whether or not you're looking to disrupt or forward your own game plan instead of freely getting to do both like 4 energy Darkhawk allowed. Round out our top performing deck list with pretty classic Destroy. The noteworthy thing in Destroy this week being that the best performing lists are all still playing Forge. There's some people experimenting with America Chavez as an additional 1 energy card, but I think it's really noteworthy that the +2 power is crucial to get on specifically Deadpool, or X-23 or Wolverine is a repeatable source of higher power to be blowing up, so getting that effect at random is much worse than Forge's controlled bonus, even if Forge is less energy efficient now. To close things out with the most popular deck list on the Marvel Snap ladder right now per untapped data, we kick things off with discard variations. It's worth noting, while I have a specific 12 card collector discard list up on the screen here, there's a lot of variation in this archetype, with Proxima Midnight as well as Corvus Glaive being our last 2 card releases. People are still experimenting and trying different things even before this OTA happened to shake things up all over again. These particular 12 cards were the strongest thing with a 200 plus match sample size in our early developing format, so if you're looking for a starting place, I think this is an excellent one, but I also wouldn't be surprised if the discard list has some of the details different next time we do one of these best decks breakdown as things mature and get optimized further. Finally, we close out the video and the popular category with this Loki variation. While there are a lot of details that are different from list to list, it's worth pointing out that the Loki decks in this category differ from the Kitty Pryde Elsa list that I showed in my personal picks, and that they tend to go bigger with more tech cards and 4 energy plays, things like Rogue and Miss Marvel in this particular deck list, as well as getting their stats from things like Nick Fury and Devil Dinosaur at the top end of the curve, as opposed from growers at the bottom. It's also worth noting that while these Loki variations are incredibly popular per untapped metrics right now, their actual win rates and average cube gains are pretty middling. That doesn't really surprise me because these Loki variations tend to lean more heavily on the deck's namesake to generate their stats, and Loki is pretty famously poor into posing decks like Discard that take multiple turns to set up or require getting key pieces that go together that you're not always going to get off of a single Loki pull. I think this archetype is a comfort pick because it didn't have any of its cards nerfed in this most recent change, and I wouldn't be surprised if going forward it doesn't end up being in this popular category as people optimize and figure out other things in the format that have better metrics, such as things in the top performing and high potential categories from this roundup. All in all, I gotta say, I've really been enjoying my time playing Marvel Snap after the over-the-air update so far, and with Twitch drops going on right now, I've been playing a lot of it. While there's definitely some Alliance lurking around the edges of the format that are frustrating as ever to play against, I feel like I've been able to play with a variety of things and not been embarrassed with their performance inside of decks, and more specifically, I've been playing a lot of decks without Shang-Chi, like the She-Hulk control deck that I featured at the start, and really have still been feeling like I'm able to successfully keep up, which is really all I want out of a Marvel Snap format. I really gotta say that even Darkhawk looking like it's remaining playable with this change seems like one of the best possible outcomes, since I know a lot of people were going to be sad if one of their favorite characters is no longer a card that they could lean on. As always, I'd love to know what you're finding success with after the OTA in a comment down below, and hopefully we'll see you back here again real soon for some more Marvel Snap content here on YouTube.